奉主耶稣圣名，那我们继续来跟大家分享这个箴言31章哈。
In the name of the Lord Jesus, we continue our sharing on Proverbs chapter 31.
那我们现在进行到第二部分，就是怎么样从工作能力当中来谈，我们怎么做个好管家哈。
So now we progress to part 2, where we're talking about how to be a good stewards of the house of God from looking at the ability of our work.
你可以看到这个才德妇人，她有专业的技能哈。
So we can note that this virtuous woman, she has a lot of specialized skills.
好，我们看13节。
Let's read verse 13. Verse 13, she seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands.
19节。
Verse 19, she stretches out her hands to the distaff and her hand holds the spindle.
22节。
Verse 22, she makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple.
在那个时代哈，做衣服是必要的一个技能。
So during that time, it's a very essential skill to be able to know how to make clothing.
尤其如果说这个妇人如果她会做衣服的话，他们家庭的这个穿就没问题。
And particularly for the woman, if she's able to make clothing and garments for her household, then there's no issue with providing garments for the entire family.
那你要做衣服要先有布嘛。
But in order to make a clothing, you need to have materials.
那个布料。
Fabric.
对，那你布料要有那个纱线哈，要纱线。
And for fabrics, and you also need threads.
所以就有那个经纬哈，那个纺织器可以把那个经然后纬这样子织成一块布这样。
And so you need to be able to have this also the tools that is needed and weave the fabrics and the threads together in a work of tapestry.
他不但会做衣服，还会做毯子。
And so not only she knows how to make clothing, she also knows how to make tapestry.
那总之就是你会发现这个才德妇人她会越这个呢，她的这个纺织能力是从上游一直到下游都会这样子哈。就是她从这个怎么样子有纺线到做布，一直到做衣服、做毯子，她都会。
So you can see the progressiveness from her skills, starting from the basic skills of needling and threading to making clothing until she can also make intricate tapestries.
在教会当中，因为我们几乎都是义工了哈，除了我以外。
So in the church, basically, apart from myself, the rest of the workers are all voluntary workers.
那义工有时候我们就会认为说因为义工嘛，大家都是把自己多余的时间能力来奉献教会，所以我们有时候教会也不会太过要求了。
And so because we are doing all this church work on a voluntary basis, and it is using the spare time that we have to do all this church work, and as a result, sometimes the church does not set high requirements or standards on the work.
我记得很早以前
I remember in the early times.
那时候我还在台湾。
I was still in Taiwan. 有
一个教会他们说要为这个领会的人做那个意见调查。意见调查就是你看你有什么意见啊这样子。
So we had a feedback session for the sermon speakers.
等于说讲完之后，大家信徒来看看你满不满意啊？然后有什么意见这样。
So it was a survey to the members, given to the members, to give feedback to the sermon speaker whether they're happy with the sermons or not.
可能负责人意思是说要大家这个讲到能够进步了哈。
Perhaps the church council at the time had the intention of improving the sermon speaker.
哇，大家就跳起来了，开玩笑，很多人就那我不要排我了这样。
But then, because of this implementing this survey, then a lot of sermon speaker was actually a bit of pressure on them and did not want to continue with the work.
那时候我到那间教会的时候，他们就跟我讲这个事情。
So when I was assigned to look after this church, some of the members raised this issue to me.
我的想法是想说，哇，大家都是拨控这样会不会给大家太大压力？
So at the time, I was thinking to myself, all the workers are doing this work out of their spare time that they had, and so would this action, this implementation, put extra pressure on them?
我说如果这样做对传道人，他们传道也不能接受，何况是这些多余的时间准备道理这些用剩余的时间来准备道理这些 sermon speaker 了哈。
So I was thinking to myself, if the survey was to be implemented across the preachers who are paid workers of the church, it's also difficult them to accept, let alone to be applied to the voluntary workers of the church who is preparing these sermons out of their spare time.
那既然我们是神的管家，
However, since we are the stewards of God,
那我们在神给我安排的工作当中，我们自己给自己要求。
and in all the works and that is entrusted to us by God, we need to set a standard and requirement of ourselves.
我知道有些姐妹她在做这个厨房服侍大家的时候，服侍大家这些餐点的时候。
And I understand for some sisters who serve in preparing meals for the church.
那他们就会去想要怎么做得更好。
And all the sisters would actually try to think of different ways how to improve their service.
那怎么样为教会省钱？
What can they do in order to help help church save money?
那要煮什么东西让比较多人能够接受？
And how to design the dishes that is more acceptable for all the members.
那譬如说有些教会他们也会办这个插花。
Some churches also have the work of flower arrangements
让教会感觉更漂亮。
in order to help present the church in a very beautiful manner.
那他们就还有办什么讲习会这样。
And they would also conduct different training seminars.
这个都很好了哈。
And all these initiatives are very good.
那如果有人愿意这样做，我们要给他们鼓励了哈。
And for those, if they're brothers and sisters having the heart to serve, we ought to give them the appropriate encouragement.
那我们在澳洲比较多，就是譬如翻译的训练。
And in Australia, it's more common to have seminars, training seminars for example, interpreting.
那一般翻译的开始就翻的不会太顺，这个都是很正常的哈。
So for the interpreters who are just starting off in this ministry, perhaps at the beginning they're not very smooth in their translation.
那重点是给一点时间，会看到越来越进步，很好啊，这样哈。
But the main point is to give them some space and time for them to improve, and you can observe the improvement over time.
我想这个是我们每个圣工人员可以给自己一个进步了哈。
So all these things are individual workers can set their own personal goals and improvements.
包括我自己在内，我是觉得说也应该给自己一些成长这样子哈。
And myself included, I feel I also need to set some goals for my personal improvement.
譬如说这个中文圣经我应该是读了好几遍这样子嘛。
For example, in the Chinese version of the Bible, I have already read through it multiple times.
但是英文圣经我自己感觉到都读不完的感觉。
But as for the English translation of the Bible, I feel that even though I tried, but it seems very difficult for me to complete the entire Bible.
那后来这2年，我那个 COVID 期间在 Adelaide 嘛哈。
And so for the last 2 years in the pandemic, I was stationed in Adelaide.
我想说这个一石二鸟哈。
So I thought kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
既然出去散步，就顺便听，就是听这个人家怎么读圣经这样。
So in my daily exercise and out walking, while I'm walking, I thought I would also listen to the audio English Bible.
又可以运动，又可以听，练习听这些英文圣经嘛。
So on one hand, I'm doing my daily exercise. On the other hand, I'm also listening to the English version of the Bible.
因为有时候这个英文的这个的专有名词，有时候记不太起来哈。
Because I find that it's difficult for me to remember specific terms, English terms, for certain words in the Bible.
那我想说，如果有愿做的心神都会悦纳。
And I find that as long as you have the willing heart to do it, then God will be pleased with our heart.
所以我们可以思考自己，在教会当中，你会觉得哪些侍奉好像你有那个特别的，觉得一个责任感，说我要做得更好。
And so we can all consider in which aspects of the divine works in the church you feel passionate and you feel that there's this sense of commission that you need to do it better.
而且有些事你会越做越多，然后面向会越广。
And you find that in these areas of ministry, you are getting involved more and more, and gaining more experience.
就像这个财的妇女一样啊，
Just like this virtuous woman.
她开始会做衣服。
At the beginning, she knows how to make clothing.
那如果说布料会自己做的话，可以省一些成本，就开始学习怎么做布料，对不对？
And when the more she can gain experience in making more clothing, then she can save money on
对，所以19节说他开始拿那个缆线杆，然后呢又这个手把这个纺线车，对不对？
So in verse 19, you see how she uses on her hand, she's got the distaff and also the spindle.
好，那做衣服，既然做衣服，也可以再继续做毯子啊，对不对？好。
And so she started off with making garments and clothing, then next she extends her skills to making tapestries.
那接下来每一个布料的制作方法也不太一样啊。
And each fabric requires different skills of putting them together.
看比较简单是细麻布啊，
So the more basic ones is the fine linen.
后来紫色布呢更难哦，那要学习怎么去染色嘛，这个又要再继续学习。
But if her clothing is one with purple threads, then she needs to know how to dye the fabric.
然后再看16节哈，
We also can read verse 16. Verse 16, she considers a field and buys it. From her profit she plants a vineyard.
24节，
Verse 24, she makes linen garments and sells them and supplies sashes for the merchants.
当然从字面上意思，他是很会做生意的哈。
And so from these two verses, we know that she's very business-minded.
换句话说，他很会运用家里的资源哈，把它做得更大哈，把它极大化这样。
And she knows how to make use of the resources at home and expand what she's doing.
我想这也是我们可以学习的方式。
So this is also a method we can try to apply ourselves.
根据我们手所有的啦。
And so use what we have with our hands.
比如说，假设教会需要大家奉献，
Use what we have on hand. And for example, the church needs our offerings.
是根据你所有的部分去奉献。
So we offer according to what our ability and what we have.
我们不会教信徒说你去贷款哈，每个人都负债去奉献，绝对不会做这个事情。
The church will never ask the members to go out and get a loan in order to offer for the church.
好，那那神就是根据我们所有的，然后去对教会的一种服侍。
So we serve the church, give and contribute to the church according to what we have.
那有人是刚好在他的专业就是在做这个事情。
And so in the church there will be members who have dedicated in a particular area of their ministry.
比如他是做 IT 的哈。
For example, there are some who specializes in IT area.
那刚好教会需要 IT 的人才就刚好可以运用到这个上面来。
Members who work in IT by profession and they can help out the church in the IT aspects.
好几年前哈，
A few years ago,
有个青年就问我哈，
there was a youth who asked me
说我学这个对教会有没有帮助？
and asked me if I were to take up this study in this particular area, would that be helpful to the church?
我说你不要这样想，
And I said to the youth, don't think about it in this way.
你先按照你自己的擅长的，你好好考虑，然后你选你喜欢的，你觉得对你来讲比较有利的这些科目哈。
And so I advised the youth that you start off with doing something that you enjoy, that you like doing, and your strong suit.
那刚好教会有需要，
And if it turns out that the church has a need,
那你就刚好可以把它运用出来。
then you can bring out and utilize what you have learned for the church.
我说在我们那个时代，
So in my generation,
譬如在我读大学那个时代，
when I was in university,
你那个电脑是要到一个电脑的一个大的这个房间里面去用电脑。
so in order to use a computer, you have to actually go into another room that has this computer mainframe set up.
你进去都要穿衣服的，穿那个大衣的，因为很冷嘛，要一直吹冷气的。
So because the place that they store the computer, the large computer equipment is very cold. So when you go into the room to use the computer, you need to put on a jacket.
我说那个时候如果信徒学电脑的话，你怎么可能用在教会？教会不没有那个需要。
So if in that time the members were choosing to go into that profession, it's at the time not very useful for the church.
但是10年后、20年后就不一样了哈。
But 10 and 20 years later, it's a different situation.
你看教会越来越需要这方面的人才来帮忙教会这样。
We can see how over the years now that it is in this area that we need more members who have this IT specialty to help the church.
前阵子在雪梨教会哈。
Not long ago in Sydney Church,
他们买了一个会堂嘛。
they have purchased the second chapel.
政府批准的部分他们就还是要按照政府还是按照这个规矩来这样子。
So they need to follow the due diligent process in gaining the council permits.
那一直等到可以用了，他们就可以搬进去。
And once they have received the appropriate permits by the council that was issued, then they can move into the premise to use it.
剩下那些细的部分呢，他们很多弟兄都可以做了。
And with the leftover renovation work, the smaller renovation task was able to be done by the brothers and sisters of the church.
比如说他们又隔了一间来做这个 AV room， 还有像我们这边 nursery room 这样子。
So the church, the brothers in the church, they actually did their own work to divide the internal structure of the church and separated AV room and nursery room.
因为他们很多弟兄要做这个装修的工作。
And because in the Sydney church, they have a lot of brothers who are involved in the construction industry.
所以有一段时间我每次去，每次都不一样，每次都不一样啊。
So I remember during my multiple visits there, every time I visited the second chapel, and there will be new renovation work that is completed.
那些弟兄也很乐意啊，因为他们说很难得有这个机会把他工作上的专业用到教会上面，他们就很高兴。
And the brothers of the church, they're also very willingly they doing this work because it's rare to be able to utilize the skills that they do by their profession and use it in the church.
那当然，如果说有些事情跟我们的我们的工作没有相关的话，也没有关系。
Of course, it's fine if what we do by profession has little to do with the church.
那如果教会如果说安排到我们做什么，我们就可以重新学，也蛮好的。
In that case, whatever the church assigns us to do, and we need to learn new skills in order to do it, that's also quite a good thing.
最近我们有个教会，我们有个姐妹被选上做财务。
So recently in one of our church, there was a sister who was appointed to be the financial affairs.
她很害怕啊，我什么都不会啊。
And she was terrified because she thought that she didn't know anything.
我说你不用担心。
So I said to her, don't worry too much.
你那个看起来应该不会太难，你去学应该没什么问题。
So it shouldn't be too difficult, and you can just take your time to learn what you need to know.
你可以慢慢做。
So you can take your time to do what you need to do.
重点是要把那个账做对了。
And the main point is to be able to present the financial figures correctly.
那你可以请之前那个财务的教你怎么做。
And you can also get advice from the previous financial affairs.
没有多久他就做得很好啊。
So not long after taking that position, she's actually doing a very good
所以
job.
有时候真的没有做过也没有关系，我们好好的学也是一个挑战嘛。
And so even with no prior experience in that particular role, we don't need to be overly anxious even though it's challenging, but you give the time, we will do well.
好，第三部分是人际关系。
And the third aspect of being a good steward is the interpersonal skills.
我们不要忘记，其实我们在教会当中，我们不是只有处理神跟人的关系。
And so let us not forget that in the church, we are not only resolving issues between the relationship between men and God,
也包括人跟人之间。
but it also involves solving issues between men and men.
当然有人说啊，有些人比较外向，比较很容易跟人家谈话。
And though it's true that there are some people who are more extroverted in their nature and can easily converse with
有
others,
人很害羞，都不太愿意跟他讲话。
but there are some who are very shy in nature and would not take the initiative to converse with others.
那这个没有什么对错，没有好坏啊，每个神给人个性就是不一样。
And it's not that one is right or wrong, it's just that God has given us a different personality.
但是有几件事情是不管谁都要注意的啦。
However, there are a few things that whichever personality types you are, there's certain things we need to take note of.
我们看20节。
Let's read verse 20. Verse 20. She extends her hand to the poor, yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy.
我想第一件事情是跟我们个性无关呐。
So this first item has nothing to do with our personality.
任何人他都神的工人要学习怎么去关怀这些比较弱势的。
Any worker of God need to be able to learn how to show concern to those who are in need.
当然，他这边是以经济的角度啊，有些贫穷的人就拿物资来帮助他。这样
So this verse comes from a material perspective where there are those who are lacking in material needs, and we extend our help to them.
那这现在教会当中，可能这方面需要不是很大哈。
And in the church today, perhaps this scenario where members are lacking in material things is not a problem that we often see.
我讲是叫澳洲啦，我讲澳洲。
I'm referring to churches in Australia.
其他的总会还是需要的哈。
And this problem may be more prevalent in other general assemblies.
但你可以用其他方面去关心呐哈。
But despite this, we can use other methods to show our concern for
比
others.
如说有些人他的一时之间的情绪非常的软弱。
For example, there may be certain members who find it hard to handle their emotions.
或是譬如说在去年的时候哈。
For example, last year,
那我们澳洲教会第一个得到 COVID 的这个弟兄哈。
the first brother who contracted COVID in Australia.
那应该是 Delta 吧？那时候 Omicron 还没开始这样。
And at the time, it was the Delta wave, and before the arrival of Omicron.
那然后太太刚怀孕。
So at the time, the wife of this brother, she was just received news that she's pregnant.
那个时候呢，教会就开始安排大家负责送饭给他们吃这样。
So at the time, the church organized for brothers and sisters to take turns to deliver meals to them.
有人是自己煮，那有人是点外卖，不管，反正你就是这餐就你负责啦啊。
So some brothers would buy takeaway, or some would cook from home and deliver the food to this couple.
那这就是一个很好的例子。
And this is a very good example showing concern.
感谢神，教会在这方面如果越是关怀到越弱势的，其实神越会把更多的信徒加给我们这样。
So we thank the Lord that if in this area where we are able to do well in showing our care and concern for those who are in need, then thank the Lord, and then we will definitely see increasing in our membership.
在我们墨本，我们感谢神，我可以看到我们信徒自愿的去关心一些比较少来的弟兄姐妹，我觉得这是绝对是好事。
And so in Melbourne Church, I thank the Lord. We see how brothers and sisters would volunteer their time to reach out to those who have not come to church for a long time.
好，那第二个我们来看23节。
And second item is in verse 23. Verse 23, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land.
我讲就是这个啦，哇，这个才德妇女。忙得半死，老公在那边喝茶、泡茶聊天哈。
So just now in the example at the start where I gave this virtuous woman is so capable that her husband didn't have much to worry about, and he just needs to sit by the gates and enjoy a cup of tea.
如果这个时候发生在我们教会信徒的话，我们姐妹会抗议啊。
If this were to really happen in church these day and age, perhaps our sisters would mount some objections.
一起赚钱，做家事只有太太在做，怎么可以呢？
How is it that both parties are involved in earning money for the family, but the house chores is left to the wife only?
好，那这个其实如果我们用教会角度讲，就很容易解释了。
But if we were to explain this verse 23 from the perspective of the church, then it's easier to
因为我
explain.
们知道这教会是耶稣基督的教会。
And because we know the church is the church of Jesus Christ.
那重点还是我们这个头还是主耶稣基督啊。
The head of the church is Jesus Christ.
曾经有个工人呐，他很热心呐，他很好了，很好。
We once had a worker who was a good worker and very zealous in the service.
但你说他讲话就会表达说这是我的教会这样。
However, in their speech, inappropriately, sometimes they would say, "This is my church."
那当然，言语上表达没有不能说从一句话在挑毛病，不能这样子。
Of course, we can't just quote one sentence from this person out of context.
但我个人认为说，我社工人员变得要很小心，就是这点要很小心。
However, I feel that as workers of the church, this is an aspect that we need to be very careful about.
就是这个就像这边讲的这个做先生的让他出头，那这个做太太就很默默的这样做。
And that in a church setting, we need to know who is the head in this relationship. So the head needs to be the prominent one, and the wife of the party needs to stay low key.
意思说教会就是耶稣基督为主，那我们都是无用的仆人嘛，哈。
And so in the church, is the head is our Lord Jesus Christ, and he's the prominent one, and then we are his members of the body.
但我们也不用做太夸张了，哈。
Of course, we don't need to take it to an extreme.
比如说有些默默的做，比如说默默的在打扫，哈。
For example, some members they would do the cleaning work quietly.
哇，被人家看到了，哇，很害怕，不用担心啦，又不是做坏事，对不对？
And if they were discovered by other members and paying attention to them, and they would feel very afraid, and there's no need to be that anxious about
他
it.
想说哇，会被人家看到之后，我就得不到那个福气了。
They're no need to be afraid to so anxious that if they are observed by others doing this work, that they won't get the reward.
所以是在讲那个是特别讲的故意啦，故意让人家知道那种是指这方面，说得到别人称赞就得不到神称赞，那是讲故意的方面。
What Jesus was teaching us for those who are deliberately presenting themselves out there so that they can receive praises and honor from others.
好，那这个是我们在工人的一个态度，要怎么样隐藏自己，这也是一个态度了哈。
So this comes down to an attitude that the worker needs to equip themselves with, is knowing how to hide themselves in their service.
有时候就是很自然的状态哈，看神怎么带领，我们也不用刻意说躲起来，也不用刻意把自己彰显出来。
So it's let things progress very naturally. We don't need to deliberately take extreme measures to hide our work, and also not deliberately magnify ourselves in front of others.
当然我们常常会讲说感谢主啊，那都是神在带领这样。
And so we would often say we thank the Lord for his guidance.
我这个我也是在学习中了哈。
And this is something that I myself is also in learning in progress.
就比如说在正道之后哈。
For example, after delivering a sermon,
也有信徒会给一些正面的回应，那你听也会觉得很高兴这样。
and there will be members approaching me and giving me very positive feedback. And once you hear this feedback, you're so very happy.
但我知道说吃蜜各太多是不好的嘛哈。
However, I also understand that it's not good to be always on the receiving end of all these positive feedback.
所以我们老前辈就教我们说你如果听到这个，你赶快转个话题，不要讲太多，赶快转个话题来讲。
So our senior teachers would often teach us when we receive compliments like this, then you can quickly change the topic to another matter.
如果是建议的话就要再讲多一点这样。
However, if it is constructive criticism or suggestion, then we need to pay attention to more of these.
那这个是我们在人际关系当中呢，我们怎么做个学习。
So this is an aspect we can learn in our interpersonal skills.
最后我们看30节跟31节。
Lastly, we can look at verse 30 to 31. Verse 30, charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. 31, give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates.
以前在很早期的时候，这些传道人会跟姐妹说，不要化妆，艳丽是虚假的，美容是虚浮的。
Very early stage at the church, sometimes the early workers, the preachers of the church will use this verse and say, sisters, you should not put on makeup because charm is deceitful and beauty is passing.
那个时代的背景我觉得在那个时代可能这样讲可以了哈。
And perhaps during that generation, they have their context and that background during that time. Perhaps it was appropriate to exhort the believers in such a manner.
在这个时代可能有不同的解读了哈。
But in the current generation, we have a different understanding of what this verse means.
不会说姐妹穿睡衣出去啊，对不对？去上班穿睡衣啊，为什么艳是虚假的？不能这样讲啊。
We won't advise the sisters to go out, leave their house in their pajamas because we don't need to worry about your appearance because beauty is passing.
因为每个场合有每个场合它适宜的一个服装哈。
Because we all know that in different environment, different situation calls for different attire.
所以保罗他就说合宜的服装，保罗就会这样讲哈。
So Paul also exhort the believers what is appropriate.
就是那重点是后面这句啊，说其实这个功能最主要是后面这句叫敬畏神的妇女必得称赞。
But back to the verse in Proverbs chapter 30, the main thing as a worker is to have the attitude of fearing God.
如果一个人他能力很强，
If there is a person that is very capable
也很会做人，
and knows how to behave themselves,
然后呢，在很多的性格上也得到大家的称赞，
and also has a lot of positive recognition among others,
但是心里不会敬畏神，
but even with all this, but this worker in their heart don't know how to fear God,
那很危险的呢。
then it's very dangerous for that
我
person.
们看一下这个以西结书哈，
If we turn to the book of
如
Ezekiel,
果你看一下以西结书28章，
Ezekiel 28,
他说这个堕落的天使原本是很好的哈。
so this fallen angels initially was very good.
12节说你无所不备啦，他说这什么seal of perfect 是不是 perfection 是不是？
In chapter 28, verse 12, it was described as were the seal of perfection.
那什么叫做完美的印记？什么意思？
What is this seal of perfection means?
就是我们讲所谓的好像我们今天这个以前我们在国小在读书的时候，学校都会选那个模范生啊。
So it's just like when we were when I was back in primary school, and the teacher would often choose the model student.
老师就颁奖，这个是我们这班的模范生。
So the teacher would give this model student a prize for being the model
那
student.
就叫所有的班上学习他这样。
And the purpose is so that the rest of the class would learn from this model student.
所以这个基路伯他是模范生，所有的天使当中的模范生。
So this cherubim is the model student.
但是他觉得最大的问题是他不想要做模范生，他要做老师。
However, the problem with that is the cherubim does not want to be the model student, but he wants to be the teacher instead.
因为模范生是老师的眼光来评断的。
The model student has that status from the perspective of a teacher.
他觉得不够，我要做老师，我要来定规则。
But that was not enough for him, so he wants to be promoted to the status of a teacher and to set the rules and regulations for the class.
本来是模范生，到最后被打到地上去。
So initially, was once the model student, but in the end was struck down to the earth.
所以这个敬畏神，这个还是最核心、最重要的一个特质。
Therefore, the core attitude, critical attitude of a worker, the most important is to fear God.
31节这么说哈，
Verse 31,
说若一个敬畏神的工人
a worker that fears the Lord,
愿他享受操作所得的。
give her the fruit of her hands.
就是说他可以看到他一些成果。
Meaning to say that this worker is able to see the results of their work.
那个成果不是指说做事情一定很好，这个一定都很成功，不是这个意思。
Seeing the results of the work does not necessarily mean seeing successful results.
而是后面说她在城门口得到荣耀，这是从她丈夫所得到的称赞。
But be able to see the results that is described in the second part of verse 31 to receive praises from her husband.
换叫她先生就在这个城门口，跟这些众长老讲说，你看我这个老婆很好，这样类似像这样子。
She's receiving praise in the gates because her husband would be praising her in front of the elders.
对我们来讲也是了哈。
So it is the same for us
你
today.
想想看，如果说主耶稣在天上跟那些天使啊。 这些得救的信徒说：“你看，你看这个做的，不错，这样子哈。”
We can imagine in heaven when our Lord Jesus in front of the angels and all the saints of all and is giving compliments about the good work that is being done.
那我们一定可以得到生命的满足。
And with this, we will be able to feel very fulfilled in our life.
好，这是简单跟大家分享到这段我们大家一起来学习哈。
So this ends our sharing a few points about workers, and this is for our mutual learning.
那我们最后来一起来唱诗哈。
Lastly, let us sing hymn
287首。
287.